got a quorum here, right?
Yes.
All right, great. So looking at the agenda, we have basically two things to discuss. One of them is the Cutler School Building Project, and the second one is the 2020 or 2026 operating budget. I am happy to take any of those out of order or in order, if other folks in the committee have a preference. No. Well, we can do the school board one, or the new school project, since that's first on the list. Um, so uh, basically the news that I have since we met a couple weeks ago, just before Christmas, was that we had agreed on kind of a particular process that had to do with how we were going to render an opinion on the new school project. And we were acknowledging that we were a finance committee, so we were going to be focusing on the financial aspects and implications of choosing to do the project or not. And um, the other major decision that we had was that we were going to be doing an up or down vote on the project rather than trying to come up with a third option, um, just within the finance committee. So the actions that I'd taken from that were to reach out to the Hamilton finance committee chair and see what he thought about that process. And I did meet with him um, on Monday of this week, and we talked about it. And I think he is in agreement generally, and he kind of agreed to continue working with me. And then we had um, the all chairs meeting this afternoon. So that would have been the select board and finance chairs, and also the school board chair, as well as the superintendent, just to get more information about the various school budgets and school projects. And there, um, John further agreed to help work on the thing that's least well known, right? So a lot of work has been done, especially by John and the Hamilton FinCom chair, to understand exactly what the project is and how much it will cost and what the cash flows will be of doing that. The thing that is not well known, and he's kind of agreed to help to work on it. And I think it'd be probably in our best interest to um, to have the same numbers between the two different finance committees. He's agreed to help us figure out exactly what the financial implications of choosing not to do the new school project would be to the town. Um, and Eric Tracy, the superintendent, said he would provide information and guidance on the numbers he had. But I think it seems to me the action that we have is that John has been providing to Hamilton's citizens a 7-year forward-looking capital expenditure list. Um, and so he thinks he has a lot of the information already that would say what would it cost to basically limp along for another 7 to 10 years with the existing buildings. What would we have to do? New roofs, new this, that, and the other, um, and would help kind of quantify, what we would do if what the town would most likely have to do if we did not do the new building. So that's news as of, I don't know, 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock today. Um, and I will open up for anybody else has got question or news or projects they've been working on.
And Finn, I just wanted to point out that David is on now as well.
Okay. Cheers, hey, David.
Yeah, sorry, I was a little late.
It's Jared. I just vis-a-vis what you just said, which I completely agree, I think is the correct decision tree. In one of the links that was provided. I think it's link number 3 in the email that went out this morning. There's a Cutler and Winthrop options with cost estimates. And there was a slide in there, which basically, it is, if you click on it, there's a slide right in the front that says base repair code upgrade. So I'm assuming, that what we get back is going to basically dovetail off of that slide.
I hope so, Jared. One of the things I worry about is, and I think, is that the school board might say, okay, fine, then you're going to have to spend millions of dollars to renovate this building, right? These existing buildings, and that would be wasted money because we would have to trash the building in 7 or 10 years anyways when we do the new school project. So that's one of the things I want to clarify with John,
Okay.
who probably put a lot of that together, is because if you recall, one of the options that we're not going to be considering, but there's financial information about it as they went through the decision tree, was do we go and do the project as it's conceived now, or do we renovate each one of the 3 elementary schools all the way up to code so they can last for another 30 years, right? And it seems to me that if the no new school right now option is picked, we probably don't or won't try to renovate those buildings all the way up to 30-year condition, full renovation between now and then, because those I think are not going to be eligible for any sort of Massachusetts funding, right? We'd have to pay them entirely out of pocket, and there's something like 40 or 50 million dollars for each one of those buildings.
So does this mean we're going to get a completely new deck? In other words, that this quote base repair code upgrade, which is in for Cutler, which is in what was provided, is moot, or
I think I'm just not sure, and
okay.
this is what I think we need to clarify, right? Because
Okay.
I don't want to put in there a full renovation of Cutler if we're also assuming that in 7 to 10 years we have to tear Cutler down and do this project all over again, kind of consolidate it, close Winthrop down in 7 to 10 years and, take Cutler, and double and triple Cutler's size in 10 years. So it'd be wasted money. I think you wouldn't choose to do that, right?
Yeah. Okay. I just was trying to make sure I understood what was being presented to date. That's all. I agree. I completely agree with you, but it would appear, and again, perhaps you could ask them this question, since this information was provided, that this base repair / code in orange C1.0 is what you just said. In other words, limp along. But
Jeff,
it doesn't say
can you
that.
share your screen, share that file, just so that we're all
I'm not.
looking at the same place?
I don't think I'm that technically facile. It's the
Jeff
number
might be able to
3
do it for
link
us, right?
in the material that Jeff provided this morning or yesterday.
I think it's HW Evaluations is the name of the PDF.
Yeah. Oh, well, that's another one, but that's I was going there, but that's the same dot. Yeah, okay. That number foots to the slide that I'm looking at. That's correct. So I'm looking at C1.0. And I just was trying to clarify if that's the limp along, the one in orange is the limp along scenario.
That's a good question. I think we need to clarify that, because it would be difficult to see how that could be a better situation where we have to spend that much money and then do something similar to that in Winthrop.
Which is exactly why I wanted people to focus on that, because I agree.
Is Winthrop the next page? Because it says W.
Well, that's the next thing. I went through all the materials and
Mhm.
I could not find a quote limp along unquote scenario for Winthrop. They didn't provide one. In other words, I think these materials were all presented under the to Hamilton under the assumption that, Winthrop was going to be scraped at some point anyway, or have a massive renovation. So that was my next question, which was, if this is in fact the limp-along scenario for Cutler, we have a major piece of the puzzle already in hand, but we do not have a similar slide, or at least I could not find one for Winthrop.
Well, there's a
So that would
slide
be
that
the
I
question
think
to find out
combines
where
them.
that is.
There's a slide, I think, that combines those, where it's defined as alternative C10. It's back farther up in the presentation.
Well, I think you need to break out what Winthrop looks like by itself and Cutler by itself.
I'm with you on that. I want clarity, right? And if C10 is upgrading both, or it's just upgrading one, and I'm not sure.
It says one, and that's why I wanted to clarify.
Hmm.
And then on the other slide that I had, which was from the other deck, they provide that same number, the 44826 for Cutler, base repair code upgrade, and then and they do not provide one for Winthrop. In other words, it's an active discard. They have the addition and renovation numbers and new construction numbers, but they did not provide a base repair code upgrade deck for Winthrop alone.
And I have no idea whether or not Bucher also needs to be considered here as some sort of project. Now, frankly, I don't know. And maybe Bucher doesn't matter, because in both scenarios, you do this project or you don't do this project, Bucher continues to exist.
That was my assumption.
Yeah.
But I just, it'd be easy to clarify for the people who prepared this, what that Cutler number is, if it's the quote unquote limp along or not. But then it begs the question, why didn't they provide it in the same deck for Winthrop?
Jeff, you're on mute.
Jared, are you looking at, have you looked at slide 5, which is, I think, where the summary is? Is that the same data as you're looking at further down in the?
What do we?
What are you referencing, Bob?
Page 5 of the presentation you're looking at.
All right, so
These aren't numbered, so
yeah.
Well, the pages, the pages are numbered in when you on the PDF screen.
Yeah, that's true. I can go here.
Because I think one of the things we need to do while you're looking for that is, I think we need to define the cases that we're going to be looking at. What are we considering? Are we considering doing the project that's proposed, doing the project as with a delay, not doing anything, period, or reverting to what I read was the code upgrade was taking care of the schools.
Yeah, and one of the things I was going to say is I think that the reason there's no W 1.0, which would be orange. So C 1.0 is for Cutler. Winthrop seems to start in the 2s. My understanding in a conversation I had, I can't remember with who it was last week, was that I don't think Hamilton would necessarily renew the lease that's needed for the Winthrop school in simply a renovation scenario. So that's, I believe why that's missing here is that's not an option that was on the table, was that they would entertain a new 20-50 year lease for a completely new structure at the Winthrop site, but not necessarily for just a band-aid renovation, sort of improvement to the existing site. So I don't think, based on what I've seen and what I heard, that the sort of, baseline, the orange C 1.0 for Cutler is is the cost to bring Cutler 100% up to, code to have it continue as a school to house 285 kids. That's not just the bare minimum repairs that would, get it fully up to code, I believe, within the same site. I don't believe that was an option for the Winthrop site, but we can get more clarification on that from either Vinny or Eric at the school. But that was what I took away from a conversation the other day.
Were they making an assumption, or did they have input from the town?
I think that was sort of the input from the town.
Okay.
Because I think the issue, that we have here is that, we're seeing all these, colors and different things that have been proposed along the way to get to where we are now. But what's in front of us now is, it's this larger school on the Cutler site. That's what's been, run through the MSBA process and approved, and that we can move forward on. So we don't have the ability to say, geez, what we'd like to do now is, to do, something different on each of the Cutler and Winthrop sites. At this point, the MSBA has said, you put forward this project and we've agreed to fund it. And so now it's our chance to move forward with that project, or take another crack at it, down the road, which, Finn, I don't know if that's sort of the same take you had from our meeting today.
Right. I think the scenarios that I have heard that I think we all need to agree on is one of these assumptions we have to agree on is that at some point, either now or in the reasonably near future, we need to have a major investment in the elementary school system in the tens of millions of dollars, right? And the scenario that they've got now is getting rid of Winthrop and basically completely and putting it all in Cutler. So we could have a scenario of that we're saying, hey, citizens, if you don't vote for it, this is the most likely scenario. And it might be that in 7 to 10 years, we have to do the project as conceived right now. Take the new $142 million project and do it in 7 to 10 years instead. Of it, or it's going to be a similar cost, right? Or similar in scope and cost that we have now. Whether it's and maybe you guys would argue, or someone else would argue, no, we're not going to do that. We're going to renovate both schools, right, in 7 to 10 years, right? Because it's 7 to 10 years before we can get access to the matching grant program again. If we don't vote for it now, then we lose our spot in the grant program, and the earliest we could expect to be able to participate again is in 7 years. But one of the things that they said in the meeting was some of our neighboring towns like Ipswich got this far in the process with their own school project and voted against it and voted it down. And so they lost their spot. It went in, and it's been years. It's been more, I don't know, Jeff, you'd have to confirm this, but like the Massachusetts program won't let them back into the process so that they can even apply for a grant again. And it's been some years. So Jeff, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're always allowed to apply, but I think the issue is that they are not finding themselves at the top of the pile, because they've, proven to be, someone that, the state worked with. They got them to the finish line, and then they didn't, Ipswich didn't carry it across by getting the vote. And so that, essentially becomes like a black mark for you in the process. So you still submit your grant application to the MSBA, but you're not maybe looked upon as favorably as other people. And I think the example that they gave was that in Manchester and Essex, while Ipswich looked to do a single large school like we're looking to do here in Hamilton and Wenham, Manchester and Essex went to keep the two neighborhood schools. So they put forth the school in Manchester first, and that elementary school project is underway and is finished, and the kids are now in there. And then the Essex Elementary School was put into the system as a grant application. Less than 7 years from when Manchester Memorial was approved, and Essex Elementary was approved in less than the 7 year time frame because Manchester Essex was viewed essentially as a good partner, that they had gotten the grant approval for the Manchester Memorial School, and they had gotten the votes and gotten it passed, and that helped the Essex Elementary project to move forward. And what they were saying was the Ipswich program, while I don't think it's been the full 7 years yet, they are experiencing the resistance to their applications. The implications there are that either A, at some point they'll have to build it on their own with no state funding, or even if they get the funding down the road, 2, 3, 4, 5 years down the road, with the inflation that exists for these school projects, if they have to wait 7 years to get another crack at it with state funding, the cost of the project is going to be materially larger, than it would be right now. And while that will be, somewhat mitigated by the state aid, it's still going to prove costlier to the town of Ipswich in the long run. So I hadn't heard that explained in that way, and I hadn't been given that sort of local example before, and so I think that definitely resonated with me today, that was the first time I had a good example of, I think we're all mindful of hearing this, like, well, we have to do it now, or this will happen, or that will happen, or we won't get this or that. This was a somewhat tangible example of, here your neighbor can tell you there are ramifications to not following through with, passing the vote for this MSBA approved project.
I don't dispute for a minute the potentially negative implications of not obtaining the funding from the MSBA now. But correct me if I'm wrong, but we've been tasked with showing what the alternative is quantitatively. and so I don't, and it may be a QED, as they used to say in geometry, meaning that if it's 44 million, just to keep the Cutler going, and then now I'm hearing, well, and we can't do the Winthrop because the town won't renew the lease. So now, okay, is that a fact that we're going to be presenting to the public? I don't quite see. I think we're going to. I now no longer understand where we're going.
So let me, I've just been typing some things up on my screens here. So let me see if I can share. Oh, sharing is not turned on. I think I need to send a request to you, Jeff.
Yeah, because I think like bigger picture, we need to like really narrow, and I think like Cindy, you've done a nice job of this. Like, we need to narrow the question that we're answering here, because it's not necessarily like was the process or whatever correct, but it's like 7 years in the future, looking down the benefits from a finance committee perspective of just doing it now versus waiting. Maybe the funding comes, maybe it doesn't, but like, what are the costs? We know it's minimum $40 million, $44 million. But we need the counterfactual of also Winthrop, what that figure would look like. Assuming, I'd assume it's another 20 million at least, but it just needs to be a very narrow topic, or else we're just going to be debating whether or not the super school, like, just get bogged down in that kind of.
I mean, if for some reason the towns vote it down, Hamilton is going to have to renew the lease. Or I don't. That part I don't get.
It feels like a very unfair kind of negotiating perspective that Hamilton's putting us in by not giving us that data, because like they need to put their kids somewhere.
Particularly since most of the future economic benefits are accruing to Hamilton. Meaning that all of these decks have lots of goodies that come in because of the fact that the developable land is returned to the town for the town's future benefit, which is wonderful, but it doesn't help us in Wenham. And so we have to still put down the alternative cost analysis.
So I've just written down here what are the assumptions that I think we'd all have to agree on, right? Uh, right, that a similar size project would have to happen in 7 to 10 years. It's questionable, but I think we'd probably want to assume that we would be allowed back into the grant program, but I think we'd have to call out that we would be kind of branded as a bad faith partner, right? And
Yep.
so we might lose out on this. I don't quite know I'll call it 1/3 funding by the state. Um, I think we'd have to make an assumption about the cost per square footage of this building that we would have to build in the future, probably being higher than it is now.
Jared, but I think it's not just the cost being higher. It appears from the material they've provided that the cost of construction is going up faster than inflation, because if it only goes up with inflation, it doesn't make any real difference.
Mhm.
So I think that's something that we may need to get more information on is, is this trend going to continue with construction cost outpacing inflation?
Right. I think that we'll have to stack hands. I think if I recall the presentation they made to us at the five boards meeting, there was kind of a relatively less aggressive slope. And then all of a sudden in the past 5 years, it's skyrocketed. So we'd
Mhm.
have to kind of agree on, is the skyrocketing going to continue? Is it going to be in the middle, or is it going to go back to the old way? Right. We'd have to come up with something that we could agree on the cost per square footage. And then again, it would be a bond in the future, right? So we'd have to kind of guess at what the interest rates would be.
Right.
Um, and this is the thing that I think we are going to have to spend a lot more time on. And you were saying, Jared, right? This is the thing we don't have yet, that we don't understand yet. And the data that we've gotten so far in these decks doesn't specifically explain. It kind of gives us bits and pieces here and there. Is what is the CapEx that would have to be invested in the existing Cutler and Winthrop buildings to get us to that 7 to 10 year,
Well,
right?
I think we have it, but it's just a question of confirmation. It's this C10 in orange.
So that could be. It
But
could.
that's just Cutler. That's what I've been trying to say. They did not provide a C10 for Winthrop.
Mhm.
Again, because I think Jeff said, well, they were just assuming that the town would never renew the lease. But I don't, if the project doesn't get approved for whatever reason, they have to renew the lease or for some
Mhm.
period of time.
I don't think it's clear that that is just doing the minimum to get by for 7 years. I think
Well,
that's
it says base repair code upgrade. That sounds pretty minimum to me. I'm just reading it at its face.
well. All I'm saying is I think we need to verify that. That is
I
that
agree,
really
but it's that plus. Where's that number for Winthrop?
Mhm.
Because
Yeah, and I have that down as a question to ask Eric.
Yeah, because I'm looking at a different slide and I see for some reason the numbers never I never see the same 44 number in different places, but it's 48 just Cutler. If it's just like the C10 for Cutler on different slides, the number's slightly different, but I agree that looks like a Cutler number.
Mhm.
there's a thing that isn't on the list here, which maybe the implication is they're saying there are no savings. But, one of the things I've been looking at their budget, and, they've been cutting back on the maintenance. You'd expect that if you're going to get new buildings, you're going to be savings on the maintenance cost. You're going to have savings on utilities. It may not be a mind-boggling number, but if you get, a reduction of $1 million, that's significant against what might be a $7 million annual debt service.
Actually,
I asked that
they
question
did have that in
specifically,
some of
Bob.
the other decks.
Did they? Okay, because
Yeah.
I asked them specifically in the meeting today if they would commit to something so that we could use that to offset the increase in CapEx, or debt service, right? Because if
Mhm.
it's say a $2.5 million per year increase in our budget, but it's offset by $500,000
Mhm.
of operations efficiency, I'd like to include that. And they were not ready to put a number on that when, they specifically said, can we do this without that? you know, when I asked them specifically for that. So if they've got that calculated somewhere else, Jared, I will dangle
Well, I
that
was just
in front of them.
one of these decks was incredibly, I mean, it was very impressive, and I'm trying to find it now, which, let's see.
While you're
It's
looking,
the
one of the things I noticed,
in-school timeline deck from April of 24.
I'll try and pull that up.
Again, in this deck, the savings accrue almost. They're really this. Obviously, this was a Hamilton presentation, but it has the risks of the cost increases. It's got or construction costs, but it's got a one school versus two school. It shows that they've got a slide that says that the cost of delay is $27 million if we don't do this today. You know, they've got, in other words, they made a good case from a cost saving standpoint in this document. I mean, one of the reasons I'm trying to push them to get the standalone numbers for Winthrop is because it actually might show that you know the costs are rather substantial combined with the risks of waiting. So
Okay, I think that's a pretty valuable thing for us to get and perhaps talk with John McGrath over there at the Hamilton FinCom to see if that
it's the deck. What's it called? School building analysis. John McGrath PDF.
Oh, okay.
what page are you
Extremely
on?
impressive document.
I don't know, maybe you could throw that up on the screen. There we go.
It's in very large type. You can read it easily.
So let's see.
It shows. I mean, it's in April of 24. It shows exactly what the school committee chose and what their second choice was. You know, and then it's got a lot of very good cost information. There it is. You got it up there now.
Yeah.
I mean, this document in and of itself makes an excellent case. The only thing that's missing from the standpoint of what we need to do in Wenham, because this was built for Hamilton, is again some standalone information on Winthrop over that 7-year period. If we were kicked out of the queue.
So which page was it that you said had the $27 million of saving?
It's not paginated on my computer, but it's page 19 in the deck.
Okay.
Yeah, right there.
Cost of delay.
Okay.
Yeah, and they've got an inflation, do it now versus do it later. You can see they've put an inflation inflator in there.
Mm-hmm.
So somebody's done some very good homework here. I don't know who it was, but
It's probably John McGrath.
And this, if I'm not mistaken, this is the document that basically where in April of 24, where the school committee voted thumbs up for the project.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But if I'm looking at these numbers, one thing that's kind of standing out to me is they claim it's a 20 million, well, 22 million lost revenue to Hamilton over 30 years if you don't do this. But it looks like the assumption is 20 million of that is just selling the land from Winthrop, which does us nothing.
I'd agree with you on that. Like that is outside Wenham's scope.
Yeah.
Unless they're going to share with us in that windfall. So
Yeah. I agree.
So-
Like the broad framework is very helpful. Very helpful.
So I'm just putting in my list of assumptions that we have to agree on is that revenue from monetizing Winthrop is not applicable. Is not.
Well, to the extent that it doesn't accrue to Wenham, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And they've got some comps in here from other schools, which I thought was interesting, or other projects.
Okay, so I think what I'm hearing as an action here is that really need to get aligned on what this 7 to 10 years of capex might look like if we don't do the project, and that they've got a bunch of work here done by people that have been working on this for more years than we've been on the board over there in Hamilton that are probably a good resource. So that's going to be John McGrath and I think Jeff and I will coordinate to try to collect that and be ready to present back to you guys. And maybe it'd be a good idea to have John available for comment at a meeting that we have to come up with that. Now, I'm sure there's more discussion that we want to have on these topics, but one other thing that I want to kind of get into everyone's brains here is the timelines that we have. Right. So Jeff, keep me honest on this. Basically, we have till the end of end of February to officially provide our opinion to the select board on on the proposal to do the new construction project, right? Or to say yes or no on that.
Correct.
There are going to be meetings happening the next 2 Wednesdays where I'm feeling pressure to have straw polls at least ready to go. There is a meeting, I think, on the 15th, which is the quintuple board meeting. And that the members of the public are going to be there. And I think, Jeff, you also said there's another meeting on the 22nd coming up.
Yeah, that's a forum, I think, on the project. It's an open public forum on the Cutler project. That's, a Q&A for the public. And I don't know that we're necessarily required to be there. I'll probably attend. In a perfect world, if we had a finance committee vote of opinion on the project for that meeting, it would be great. But I think, this is a big decision, and it probably will take a little longer than that to, to have a fully vetted opinion from the committee on that. But it might, even if we don't feel like we need to be there as a meeting in the same way we need to be at the quintuple board meeting, it may be one extra chance for folks to hear some of the information presented and potentially have the ability to ask some questions in the public forum to get some of the answers we're looking for if we haven't received them up to that point.
Right. I think it might be a reasonable position for us to take to say, look, this, just to kind of reiterate to the public, this is our process. This is the FinCom's process. We are not ready to render an opinion now. You will have it by the end of February to be included in the warrant, but this is our process. We are doing what we just described here, right? We're going to do up or down, and if it's down, we are coming up with a scenario with what down would cost the taxpayers of Wenham.
Works for me.
All right.
You
So
know, it might be worth noting when you go back to the school people that when they filed their application, I read through the application, they're talking about all these benefits they're going to get, which imply savings. And it's kind of difficult if you make those arguments to then go and say, well, gee, you know, we can't come up with any savings in operating costs because the buildings are better insulated, better heating plants. Projects don't have to be done to repair the roof because we're starting with new construction, or we've got we don't have teachers who need to go back and forth between buildings, and that doesn't, you know, so we're not, so they're saving time, but that's not reflected. You know, you got administrative reductions in terms of one school versus two schools. I mean, it's a little hypocritical of them to say, you know, everything's the same, but we need a new building, and we claim to have savings, but we're not putting any numbers behind it.
right, I'm just typing that down. Bob.
Okay.
Jeff, could you remind us, like, what would be the timing of the first bond payment? Would that be hitting us in 2026's budget, or would it be another year or two before it really starts?
It would unlikely be in FY 26. I'm assuming what they would do out of the gate is to take short-term financing, what we call, bond anticipation notes to get the project moving. And presuming that they're not going to start prior to June 30th of this year, when they take those bonds, they would be due payable after June 30th of 26, which would push it into FY 27. And typically what happens with these is that, they take out chunks of funds at a time. So it's not like they borrow, $100 million or $90 million day one. They would take out a band for probably $20 or $30 million to start, and then, take incremental loans out against that. And then at some point later, they would actually, move away from short-term debt and actually, roll that into a long-term note that would be payable over, 20, something between 20 and 30 years, more than likely. And there's a lot that goes into that, in terms of, what they work with a fiscal advisor, just like we do and every community does in the state, who helps us sort of navigate, when is it, where do we think rates are heading and things like that, and when to lock in long-term, rates, versus when to continue to take short-term debt in the hopes that, that the interest rates may get more favorable. But yeah, I would say it'd be very unlikely that we would have a material payment due during FY 26.
Okay. Well, I will work with Jeff and John McGrath to come up with something more robust for everyone to sink their teeth in to next time around.
So another question just on the financing side. I assume this would be non-taxable bonds that we'd be issuing, or would they be taxable? Like what I'm not even sure what the interest rate curve would look like for kind of the.
Yeah, they will be municipal bonds. They won't be, they'll be straight tax exempt bonds. They won't even be, like private activity bonds that are subject to AMT or anything like that. They'll be straight tax exempt bonds. So that's the, the data you'll be looking at.
Okay. And we're a AAA issuer, right?
I believe we are across the board. All three participants are.
Okay.
So to that end, I'm going to be working with Jeff to find some time on the calendar for next week to hopefully come back to you with a first draft of those, of these, no new school costs and what this model might look like.
Also, you want to get the what costs are going to be saved with a new school, because you'd expect a couple of things to happen. One is, as you're anticipating the new building coming online, you're going to be spending less on maintenance because you figure they're going to be gone. And then you're going to have savings kick in that are going to be fairly significant in the early years because you got a new building, and then you're going to have those maintenance costs starting to go up as you go farther out in time.
So we're basically saying, I think the building, if I recall, the schedule is that they wouldn't break ground or they wouldn't be done with the building until the school year that begins in 2028.
28, 29, yeah, that's
Yep.
what's in
Yeah. And so it'd be like there would be I think 2 years of construction. And we're basically saying that whatever CapEx they were going to invest in Cutler and Winthrop would be saved, right? There'd be further savings because they wouldn't, replace windows or whatever in those buildings.
Yeah, that's the beginning part as you ramp up towards the day you open the school, new school. And then you've got the big difference. I mean, if they're talking about new heating plants and things being insulated, you've got to expect some kind of savings to pop in on the operating basis as well as the maintenance.
Yeah. And I think we can create a list of sort of just at a high level. I mean, I know we touched on it at that meeting today, Finn, but maybe we can just come back at the school with a list of 5, 6, 7 things where we just off the top of our head, these were some things we were thinking that might be some amount of savings, because I mean I think it could come down to, for some people, that that's the final thing that moves the needle for them, is that if to your point earlier today, let's say our bond payment is $2.5 million a year, but we think really net of savings it's 2.1 or something, that might be compelling enough for someone to make their decision one way or the other.
Right. I did get pushback, but when I asked for it, but I think we'll ask for it again.
Yeah, I mean, in my mind, that's non-negotiable. Like, this thing will be voted down if we don't have that. So, I think it's likely it gets voted down if we don't have that information.
There's one other wrinkle. It just occurred to me. I don't know if you guys saw the Globe today, but the Supreme Court did issue their decision on the 3A, and they basically said that the Attorney General in Massachusetts has authority to basically impose, whatever sanctions, penalties, fines, etc., that are required for anybody that doesn't obey the law. And which means that the arguments that were thrown out, earlier about the whole 3A thing, saying, well, we only lose $500,000, in grants, it was a unanimous Supreme Court decision, and that is a no. So the new school is in play as a sanction, if both towns don't come up with a plan. And the plan that Hamilton has basically assumes, I think, that they use the Winthrop site. So one of the things, we may be in a negative feedback loop here, meaning that that Hamilton will say, well, there is no, fix it up for 7-year plan for Winthrop because we're using that for 3A. So I would, if you guys are having talks with the guys in Hamilton, you might ask them, if point blank, is the reason why you didn't provide the fix it up for 7 years and cross your fingers plan for Winthrop is because you have this site earmarked for 3A compliance. So in other words, the options may become even more limited, given that there may not be a fix up Winthrop and Hope plan because of the recent 3A ruling which came down. The Supreme Court, according to what I heard, has said that there are some additional guidelines that the state has to issue to enforce the 3A legislation. And Healy was quoted as saying, fine, we'll have those out in a week. So the train is leaving the station, for a crude metaphor, on 3A. And that may be one of the things that unfortunately may make this up or down decision a little easier, in that Hamilton may just say point blank, we're using that land. We're not renewing the lease because we're using that land for 3A compliance, since the Supreme Court has spoken.
So my wife is on the the Affordable Housing Committee, and she's told me that Hamilton is in a worse condition than Wenham is in being able to comply with the various different affordable housing or 3A laws. One of the things I'd worry about, I don't know how to quantify it in our discussion here or in this analysis, is that what happens if Wenham complies but Hamilton doesn't? And does that put the grant at risk?
Yes, as of today, that's why that was the reason for my long speech. As of today, yes. I would encourage you guys to go grab the globe and see it. It basically, it was a unanimous decision from the court saying the attorney general may impose whatever sanctions, fines, remedies that she dreams up in order to enforce compliance with the law.
Mm-hmm.
So
Right.
this was new.
So
as
I wonder if
you know.
I hope somebody would be able to give us guidance on that. Like we're gonna if we propose something here that one of our assumptions is that the grant can't get pulled out from underneath us with this new construction scenario, right? Because if we vote this up, right, or as a town, and we agree to a $142 million project, and then the rug gets pulled out from under us, I think we're still on the hook for the full $142 million.
That's why I threw out this new fact that came out today. I obviously don't have an answer to your question.
Yeah, and that ruling is, sort of hot off the press, and I'm sure, Wenham and every other community will be reaching out to council. KP Law is council for most communities in the state, it seems, but they will be weighing in on, these things, and, is MSBA in play? Will there be folks who are grandfathered, and is it only, MSBA project evaluation moving forward? All those things. So we will be, I'm sure Steve and his group will be working with town council to get those answers sooner rather than later, as will Joe and his team in Hamilton.
But that's why I don't be surprised if the answer is there is not a fix it up for 7 years and cross your fingers plan for Winthrop, because we need the land for 3A compliance. That's probably what you're going to hear from Hamilton.
Yeah, if we come to the conclusion that we recommend this, I think I don't want to have to stand in front of the town and wade into the 3A conversation. But it might have to be an assumption that we state that says that, that by, our assumption here is that that we're going to comply and we won't be doing anything to make us, suddenly ineligible. It's almost like a rug pull. Like we would just, vote for this, commit to 142 million, go for it, and then Hamilton does something to make them ineligible, or the state decides to pull their funding because of something Hamilton does. I'd hate to be in that position.
I mean, we'll need some certainty from some kind of outside counsel, essentially saying this money is not, no matter what happens with 3A. Because I don't think we want to, as a group, or I'm not sure I'm personally very comfortable kind of weighing in on 3A in either direction. It's more of our assumption is 3A does not matter to the scope of this project if we vote it up, if that makes sense. Like the funding is, safe. So if it's not, that's very problematic. But we need some kind of legal.
Maybe I'm not making myself clear. I fully agree with what everybody's saying about that on 3A. We have to make it an assumption that the rug won't get pulled out from under. I'm just saying the decision tree may be even easier than we think, because I'm guessing as of today, there is no fix it up for 7 years and hope plan for the Winthrop School.
No, I hear you, Jared. The thing is that we've got a whole lot of very, very political decisions happening, right? In this next town meeting, right? There's the operating budget, right? Which we haven't even talked about. We've come up to an hour here. right? Which
Sorry.
is always a political thing. There's the school, right? New school, which is going to be a lot of people and a lot of emotions, right? And then 3A, like I don't see signs on the side of the road voting up or saying to vote down the new school. But I do see it for voting down, 3A. I don't think you can vote down 3A, but just saying that there's a lot of uh, resistance to it. So I was hoping that we would not have to conflate this new school with 3A and suddenly kind of hook on to some negative or positive emotions um, with this.
I hear you, and I've talked too much, so I understand.
Mm-hmm. But I'm put it on my list, so it's on my list, Jeff, for us to figure out what we can do to get some legal opinion on it.
Yeah. And the reality is, even though, I mean, you mentioned, I mean, Wenham has done quite a bit of work on 3A on our side. We postponed a vote on the 3A zoning bylaw that had been, essentially created here ahead of time. I mean, it does still have to go to a town vote. And even though we would be, maybe ahead of Hamilton in some respects, you still need to vote, affirmatively, for the zoning bylaw change. And if you don't, you're really in no different position than Hamilton is, depending on your vote. So, yeah, I mean, I think, like I say, we'll be talking to KP Law because, I don't know if now we'll need to call a special town meeting ahead of our April town meeting. So it could be that this is, the 3A issue was addressed, at least in Wenham prior to the town meeting. I don't know. I think, this complicates what was already a complicated, sort of evaluation even more, with the 3A issue being decided. But at the same time, it's, now there's a decision. So we're not speculating, how that may turn out. We've now heard that. So that is at least, one, black and white piece of information we have now. But yeah, we'll obviously continue to monitor it here in town hall, and I'll do my best to keep you guys apprised of how that's moving forward.
All right. And I appreciate everybody's thoughts on this. Is any further discussion before we move on to the second item on the agenda, which is the town operating budget? Not hearing any. Jeff, I spent a lot of time talking, introducing this stuff, so maybe it's your turn. What's your take on the latest numbers from the school board and where does that likely leave us?
Yeah. So give me a moment, and I will and I'm just gonna share, and then I will share the share. Here we go. I think this is it. All right. So I had sent around last night, this morning. I can't remember when I sent around the latest version of the budget. This is just a continuation of the budget you saw at the kickoff meeting back on, I think, the 14th of December. What you saw in that meeting was a much higher level sort of wages and expenses for each department. This Excel file I sent you folks, or actually I sent you the PDF version of it, but I could send around the spreadsheet as well. It just gives you more detail on what rolls into, the general expenses and the wages of each department. On the town side, nothing has changed much since December 14th. The big difference is that the school has reduced our budget here in Wenham, about $400,000 since the December 14th meeting. And so, maybe it's closer to 300,000. But we were about, I think 400 or so over the levy limit back in December. Now that number's dropped to about 129,000, looking at the screen here. So we are closing in on, not being in a position for an override, which was, at the outset, clearly a goal of both the select board and the finance committee. in the discussions we have with the school today, we think it's likely that that school number will continue to come down and get us even closer to being, under the levy limit. And we are starting to get to, and I might not have said this with some of the newer members present, but, usually once we can get down to, being, whatever, $50,000, $70,000 over the levy limit, we can usually find ways to, work on some estimates, change a few expenses here or there, and get under the levy limit with, some ease. When you're $200,000, $300,000, $400,000 over, it's obviously much harder. So, from where I sit today, I don't have any large concerns that we're not going to get under the levy limit for this budget. So, that I think that's a positive for all of us. But I want, we've got the more of the detail into folks' hands. And I would say, as you go through it, anybody that wants to reach out to me directly, with questions or wants to talk about, certain departments or multiple departments or whatever it might be, I'm happy to answer any questions you might have. Our general ledger accounting system is not perfect in terms of how it's the sort of our chart of accounts is laid out, as probably as recently as maybe 4 or 5 years ago, Wenham kept a general ledger budget that was really just wages and expenses, and so it's been a process of building that out. And the issue with that is, on one hand, it's nice to have a general ledger with less general ledger accounts in it because it's easier to maintain. The flip side of that is that when you're trying to run reporting and trying to analyze things, it's tougher to do when, your wages are all just lumped into one one or two wage items instead of, 7 or 8, where you can really look at trends and look at data to evaluate, where you think things are going or where you think you can make some cuts. So that's sort of a work in process. Quite honestly, like, we use a very old accounting system here in the town called SoftWrite, which is, relatively inexpensive at this point because it's no longer being improved. It's just, they kind of just keep it running, but you're not seeing improvements. And so one of the issues, I think, even prior to me getting here, was that, I don't know if a lot of folks wanted to spend a lot of time and effort in rejiggering the general ledger chart of accounts in the old system, and maybe wanted to just wait, because normally when you purchase new software, that's a big part of the conversion cost, is they help you, rejigger your chart of accounts and things like that. So that's something in my office we're going to have to sort of make a decision on, of, do we want to just build this out one way or another and get a better, more robust chart of accounts. But, that being said, we can get to detail by digging in and looking at other reporting and other sources. So if you do have questions, we can always try to find you those answers. But I think, here I would just say at a high level, just, take a look. For a lot of you, you've probably seen the budget over the years, but it's your first time on the finance committee. So, go through it, make some notes, make some questions, and, whether it's in, future FinCom meetings, or, if you want to just reach out and chat with me or email me with questions and things, we're happy to walk you through all that. And the other thing we're working on, I was talking to Finn about it earlier today and showing him a little bit, but one of the things we're sort of focused on is, looking at, sort of other comparable communities. And so, the state of Mass has a data bank where we all put our general ledger information into a system each year at the close of the year. And the way that we code things is made so that we can compare and contrast communities. So we all, they can look at, police or fire or general government or whatever across communities, and we can get a sense of, how do we compare to, geographically, similar communities, or to population similar communities or whatever. So I've got a model that I'm building right now that I hope to send to you guys in the next couple of days, that will also give you that context around our budget in terms of, how much do we spend on fire versus Manchester, or how much do we spend on general government compared to Hamilton, or whatever. And then we also break it out into sort of a, per capita cost. And one of the things that, certainly in my hometown town of Essex or Wenham as well, being a small community in terms of population, a lot of times you'll see, we might be on the higher end on a per capita basis for some of our expenditures. And the way to think of it is, whether it's Essex at 3,500 people or Hamilton or Wenham at 4,500 people, for a police department, you still need, a police chief and, 2 cruisers on patrol with an officer in each cruiser and whatever. And so there's a minimum cost to running a department with, a chief and 2 people on duty at all times, or whatever, the typical layout is for a police department. And, if that costs $1.2 million or whatever it might be, well, in Essex, it's per capita a whole lot more than it is in Wenham, because, there's 1,000 more people to put that over. But then if you compare Wenham to another community, with 5,200 people, they look a little better, because there's sort of a bare minimum police department that covers, let's say, up to, a 5,500 or 6,000 person town. And so, this comparison thing can be helpful for folks to look at the budget and get some context. But I think it will involve us going back to departments and saying, to Rich in the DPW, Chief Kavanaugh in the fire department or something. Just, we see a trend here. We're higher per capita than, these communities. And can you just sort of lay out to us why that is? And sometimes there'll be perfectly good explanations. And sometimes I think there might be explanations that say, geez, we think there's we think there's some savings that can still be achieved here. So I think that I think certainly in Finn's mind, that's a path forward that we're going to be taking, is sort of looking at that comparative data and just having a good understanding of it, to put out there for residents.
Related to that, Jeff, we had a couple of things that were brought up at the 12-14 meeting. One was with regard to COLA and the negotiations going on. Is there an update on that one? And the second thing was that we talked about the OPEB being funded at a lower level, because I think out of that meeting, I think our desire was to try to not just get under the 2.5, but to get down closer to a 0 increase.
Yeah, I mean, I know, negotiations are ongoing, and so there's limited amounts of what we can talk about there. But we have an amount built into a reserve in the budget that summary that you see here before you. That the hope would be we're not necessarily going to use that every dollar of that we can find some savings there. The OPEB thing, we could fund less. I think I might have been the one that threw that out there as an option, because we did way overfund it with some free cash in FY25. So in theory, we're ahead of schedule on OPEB. So if that's what we needed to bring the tax rate down, the levy limit down a little bit, we certainly could do it. I think it's a bigger discussion in terms of do we still feel like we're on track to to funding this OPEB liability long term? And I think a 1-year change probably doesn't alter that too drastically. But at the same time, you also don't want to have to take it to 0, and then then that becomes $110,000 we have to find next year. So that's something I think you should all be open to doing. But you just I think as a committee and also residents, we need to understand the implications of doing certain things in 1 year that maybe are going to come back in the following year. And so it goes back to something I think Finn and I were talking at the earlier meeting today with the school, where you always want to be upfront with residents in terms of we've made this work in this year, but there are future ramifications. But I would agree that generally speaking, certainly there is an effort to not make just getting a dollar under the Prop 2.5 limit the high watermark, that we still want to find other areas where we can get lower on the expenses, and try to get to something that is maybe it won't be 0, but something closer to, though I think originally our original budget guideline from the finance committee was an increase of about 1.27%, which was essentially not using Prop 2.5 growth, but was using new growth and other growth in local receipts as a target. And I think largely other than some of our key drivers, with being pension and health insurance and those type of things, as you go through the operating budgets for the departments, I think you'll see that, many of the departments probably are coming in closer to that 1.5% range, prior to, the contractual things that are still sort of in limbo. But, hopefully, we've got some meetings coming up in the next week or so. Hopefully we're making some progress there. I mean, I think the fact that some of the bigger teacher contracts, have settled in the area now, that was looming over everybody, was, what's going on with these contracts in Marblehead and Beverly and Gloucester. And now that those are settled, that gives everybody a little bit of, clarity on how things are moving forward. So, I'm hopeful. I was actually going to talk to Steve tomorrow about, do we think, we can actually have these contracts settled and, and be part of the budget, that we present, or are we still going to be carrying a reserve, in the budget booklet? I haven't sat through budget negotiations here, or excuse me, contract negotiations here before, so I don't have any historical perspective to fall back on. But I'm sure if, everybody, all things being equal, would like to have all this settled and have the clarity so that, the budget book is, got contracts in there and we're ready to move forward. So, yeah, as soon as we have information to share there, we will be letting you know.
Well, I think it's important because we recommend the Cutler project, I think it's important that the school committee come up with savings to show what good that comes out of this project, in addition to the improved educational environment. And at the same time, I think it's important to be showing that we're trying to hold a line on the budget for the government in town, that to keep the tax rate down. So I think that it all combines in terms of, if you really want to sell the Cutler project, you've got to, appear to be working hard on the government level and also on the school committee level.
Yeah, I do. So I agree with you, Robert. The one thing I will say is, like, to kind of the points made earlier, like the OPEB just doesn't, that's kind of like window dressing versus anything, because you have to cover it at some point, versus like actually making cuts to service in some other capacity. I think that's where like the kind of more serious side of things would come in, my perspective.
Yeah.
So the one of the things that we drew out of the school committee this afternoon was that the $300,000 to $400,000 of reduction in their budget that we're seeing here, a lot of that is coming out of what I think was called E&O reserves, Jeff.
The E&D, excess and deficiency. Yep.
Right, which you might think about it as like an underspend, leftover money, sort of like free cash, right? And so what they warned us is that by assuming that all the equivalent of free cash goes in to the FY 2026 budget, it's going to put them in they won't have that available for FY 27. And so you will see a swing, a major increase in their total spend from 26 to 27. And if we accept this reduced spending operating budget from them, and it pushes through for FY 26, that increase is one of those things that I think they kept on wanting us to say that it may happen, right? It may be an increase that of like $1.3 million for their total budget, a third of which we would get, right? And that there are a few may happens in 27, 28 that we need to put on a list, Jeff, and keep in a post-it note or something like that on the wall, as we think about the narrative to informing the citizens of, major events happening in the next couple of years, right? There's this one, there's the PFAS upgrade at the water, right? And the trash contract. There's a few things that are rattling around in the back of my mind that, we have to, I don't say we have, I would say we morally have to warn the citizens about, as part of our presentation to them.
Would we be putting out numbers that look at the potential tax rate over the next couple of years? Because I've been running some models here trying to look out over time what's going to happen. And maybe that's a way to communicate with people. I don't think we've done that in the past. I think at least at the town meeting, we've just given people the next year.
It's certainly something we can look at. I mean, usually we're looking at, the year in question. But we do things that show sort of 5-year projections and things like that. So I think that's something we could add. There's always a balance of trying to make certainly at least the budget booklet, the town warrant, making it not so overwhelming that it's, people can't digest it. But, this year we'll probably have, the town warrant meeting book will be one document. And then, the new budget software that we're populating that, creates anywhere from a, 2 to 3 to 400 page, report that you can sort of take in chunks as you want. You can kind of drill down multiple levels. We could have in there, sort of a 5-year projection of where the tax rate's headed. That it can be somewhat difficult. I mean, even when we do it in the budget booklet for the upcoming year, what we always put in there as sort of a caveat is, this assumes that the property values will stay the same as what was, certified in FY25 or, whatever the most recent year is. So the tax rate, may end up being significantly different as assessments, go up. But that doesn't change the expenses by any stretch. So it still provides some people, a good barometer of where we think things are headed. And certainly, at some point, whether it's in the budget booklet or in some other fashion, we're going to ultimately have to show, depending on what you recommend, for the Cutler project, there's a significant tax rate impact to that people need to be made aware of, so that they can see that, and it's all interrelated, because it's Finn's point about the sort of the $1.3 million use of E&D at the school level that essentially can create may create a hole of $1.3 million in their budget to start next year. That has a $400,000 impact to us, let's just say, at a very high level, and so that would be added on to what next year would look like. And then, if you then say, well, whatever, a $2.5 million bond payment on the Cutler project would add another, whatever, suddenly that's a very, material increase to the tax rate. And I just think that we want to make sure we're being, above board and fully transparent on, letting people know all the costs that are coming down the pike, and not just saying, oh, well, we told you what the Cutler school would be, but we didn't mention this was the possible impact of, next year's school budget or whatever it might be. We'll continue to, work on that. And Bob sent me a number of things over the last couple of months that are helpful that I've been able to incorporate into some of my stuff. And I hope everybody feels, free to do the same. And, it's a collaborative effort to get these, sort of documents out in front of the public, and we want them to be as, robust and useful to the residents as they can be.
So one of the other things that Jeff was talking about earlier, that I wanted to highlight is the work that he's done to do that benchmarking with our sister towns. The top row here, row 5, is the town operating budget, the $12 million number there. And to give us all and then also to give the taxpayers comfort that that's a reasonable amount of money for us to be spending. The best, bit of data I can find is contrasting us to more than just 2 other towns. But Jeff was saying he's got 10 other towns that he is comparing us against, right? And it's going to be breaking it down by all the major different departments in the town, right? And that we can go and say, all right, how much does it cost to run the DPW for Ipswich and Topsfield and Manchester and all these other towns, right? And You know, it sounds like he's got those numbers ready to go. And the first step, before they come to us, I think, is going to go and send those to the department heads so that they can give us some insight contrasting these towns to us. And so if one town is significantly less expensive than us, right? You and I might say, you know, why can't we be like them, right? Why are we spending so much more? You know, let's give these department heads a chance to educate us on how we are similar or different from these towns, specific to the police department, specific to the fire department, specific to, maintaining the parks and the roads and that sort of stuff, and then come back to us. Hopefully, and Jeff, you're gonna have to give me a reasonable expectation on timing, because I think that would be useful information for us as a FinCom when we decide to approve that operating budget, ahead of February 28th, right? Obviously, I'd prefer to get that insight, the data and the insight from those department heads, well before that, so that we can discuss it and agree or disagree and decide if we want to put further pressure on any particular department to remedy or reduce their spending.
Yeah, and I think, my hope would be, we should be able to get that kind of, information back, towards the end of the month, so that you have basically the month of February, or 5 weeks before, the deadline to give our recommendations. And I think that timing probably will work out okay, because, you're probably going to be spending a majority of your time more focused on the Cutler question over the next couple of weeks. And then, the thought would be that, at that time, we'd have this information back to departments to help you as you evaluate the budgets in a context of how we stack up against other communities. And then and then there's also the fact that each different communities, Wenham, as an example, as someone who's just kind of new to the community here, there's a very significant commitment to parks and trees and things like that, and and our budget is reflective of that. So if you were to look at us relative to some other communities, we might spend more in those areas, whether it's conservation or park management or whatever, than a lot of other communities our size. And some of that is just a factor of the will of the townspeople, that's been proven time and time again to be something that the town as a whole really, really values. And so I think, while that might not even come from the departments in feedback, that might be feedback that comes more almost from the select board and folks that say, we've seen historically this, these particular things are things that Wenham just really values and has always been willing to overpay for. But I don't think that precludes the town from, looking into those things from time to time and saying, is that, now that we can, put a cost to this particular commitment or that commitment, is that something that as a community we still, now that we see how much more we pay than another community or something, is it something we're still committed to?
It would be interesting, Jeff, to decide how we could make this data, perhaps simplified, available to the taxpayers, either as part of the warrant or something like that.
I think it would be part of the supplement. So the new budget software does have a whole module on sort of comparative budgets and things like that. So I think it would be, we could certainly allude to it in that, there's a letter or there's a narrative that the finance committee writes that goes along with the finances that go in the town warrant. We could certainly allude to it to, and have it online that, this new ClearGov budgeting, budget booklet is available, where you can find, even more detail on this comparative. We could certainly allude to it in the narrative, but we could, point to the fact that it's available in this this supplemental budget information.
Going back on our previous topic of the schools, do we have available data that they're using for projecting the number of students going out over time, and particularly as the split between Hamilton and Wenham?
I believe they've got some of that in there, and it's also usually in the actual operating budget as well.
Future years.
Yeah, they do. That's a big part of what the MSBA that gives us the grants. A big part of that process is them, using their metrics to determine where they think population is going and student population is going in terms of deciding what they will fund. So, I know in Manchester, Essex, for example, I think it was back when we were doing the middle high school. They significantly reduced the size of the project we were looking at based on their projections for a future enrollment. So there should be numbers available not only from us, but there should be some MSBA numbers that show what the MSBA thinks our enrollment numbers are going to look like. So I can work with Eric and Vinny to see if they can point me in the right direction to get that more projected number. And one of the things I'm trying to gather too is that I think I mentioned in a previous meeting, since they built the new elementary school in Manchester, we've watched the enrollment numbers there drop pretty significantly, so that to the point where that school is at a much lower capacity than we would have hoped for. And so it would be interesting to see, maybe compare and contrast what did the MSBA project their numbers were going to look like, and how did they, compare to the MSBA projections, and how do we go about figuring how we think our numbers will stack up against the MSBA projections as well.
All right, so I'm just taking some notes on what we've just talked about on both of those things. All right, so I'm looking forward to the benchmarking discussion, perhaps starting in early February, and more school. Okay. All right, so do we have any other discussion points, or anything to discuss about the operating budget? One thing I think, Jeff, you and I spoke about maybe a month or so ago was that in previous iterations of this board, we've established liaisons with departments. I'm not sure whether or not it's worth it at this point in the process, but it might be something we might want to consider for next year. Basically, that we would as members, we would all kind of split up the different departments and be a point of contact to familiarize ourselves with the operations of them in a little bit more depth, and be able to speak them in more depth without having the department head here.
Yeah, and I would agree. I think given that I think the Cutler discussion, it takes on, quite a bit of the capacity of the group. Maybe it makes sense for this year. Everybody's new. We've got this big issue to address. To just sort of, let me be the main point of contact for the various departments as folks have questions. And then, over the summer, work on, or after post-town meeting, set up liaisons at that point.
Yeah, and once we have the benchmarking exercise available, that's going to make it much easier for us to actually have intelligent conversations, substantive conversations, I should say, with the departments. So, yeah, that makes sense.
All right, let me just double check our agenda here. All right, so after the operating budget, we don't have any other specific items to be discussed. So I'll just put it out on the floor. Is there any other topics folks want to cover? No? Okay, well then, just remind folks, I'm expecting to try to put another meeting on the calendar in the next week. And that we, as we look at the calendar, we're looking at next Wednesday, late afternoon, evening is the quintuple board meeting. Hoping to see you guys there all in person. And that's the horizon. I got a 2-week horizon. Hard to see past that. So we'll see what we do, and I expect to come back to you guys with more information on the budget, on the new town, the new school budget, the new school construction, and we'll be getting more data on the budget and benchmarking, in 2 weeks or so.
Awesome. Thanks for all the work you've done so far.
Yeah,
on the
thanks.
Discussion on the
Thanks,
school.
Vin.
That was very, very helpful.
Thanks,
Right.
Jeff.
All right,
Yeah, thank you,
Thanks,
Jeff.
Thank
guys.
you very much, Jeff. All right. So I'm going to propose that I'm looking for a motion to close the Wenham FinCom at 8:31 p.m. So I see Bob's got his hand up to make the motion. Looking for a second.
I'll second.
Second.
Dave's got a second. Any discussion? Not hearing any discussion. Looking for a vote. I will vote aye. Finn.
David, I.
Aye.
Bye-bye.
Jared, aye. Looks like we have 4 ayes. Any nays? Not hearing any. No abstentions. So we'll call this meeting closed. Thank you very much, everybody, for your time. Appreciate sticking around for extra half hour. Cheers.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Have a good night.
Thank you.
Night.
Bye.
Shut it down. Cursor.